Hello and welcome to Unsourced Wall. It's season 2, which is really just a way for me to rebrand while we switch schedules, and luckily it actually is a new season. We're starting on the cusp of autumn or fall or whatever you want to call it. So that just seems like a good way to just sort of recharge and reinvigorate and really get a new lease and handle on how things are going to be. And I could not ask for a better week to start this in because, my God, has it been an incredibly tumultuous week in comicsdom. I can't even wrap my head around it. Unfortunately, and sadly so, we must begin with some memoriams for 3 comic greats that only passed away heart-wrenchingly quick succession: Russ Heath, Marie Severin, and Gary Friedrich, who leave behind immense and honestly awesome legacies in all aspects and some crossover aspects of comic life and art. So let's just get into it one by one, just talking straight up about just the huge impact they made on both the medium and just the importance of just how their work and themselves really made that such a distinct and all-encompassing impression. With Russ Heath, if you haven't heard of him, he is probably one of the greats of war comics, creating and really bringing such incredible passion to DC's stable of war and army comics like Haunted Tank, Our Army at War, Star Spangled War Stories, all of these incredibly memorable and iconic series that DC put out, and they really made their mark because his artwork is just so detailed, it's so flexible, it's so realistic while also being so entertaining and engaging and completely engrossing. It has that etched in and incredibly carved and impressed upon atmosphere that just the luminaries of that era of DC Comics all shared, but each making themselves distinct in their own style and atmosphere. And it's a great loss, it really is. It would be remiss to talk about in respect to Russ Heath without the horrible injustice done upon him by that hack fraud Roy Lichtenstein, who used one of his war comic panels and sold it for like $4 million to the art community after redrawing it and completely destroying the fundamentals put into that panel from the outset. It just takes one look at the actual panel, the actual comic art, and looking at the trace over to see that Roy Lichtenstein had no idea what the fuck he was doing when he was adapting or paying homage to comic art. It's a complete wonky mess, while Heath's original is so incredibly planned out and developed into the space and into the atmosphere provided. And honestly, it's real heartbreaking that Russ Heath has passed away. We'll miss him. I know I will. And that's not to waylay the impact that Gary Friedrich and Marie Severin also had, because honestly, they really made an impact on me personally with regards to Marvel. Russ Heath, even though I don't talk about the war comic side of DC much, the war comic side of DC is probably one of the first DC comics I read when I actually started getting into comics. Not before, but like when I actually started getting in, and I read Enemy Ace and GI Combat, Creature Commandos, all that great stuff. And with Marvel, I really try to get in through, like I mentioned, Hulk, and we'll get back to that later, but also Ghost Rider, and Gary Friedrich was the co-creator of Ghost Rider. What motivated me to get into Ghost Rider, because just look at that entire concept, that entire atmosphere, that entire look, it begs the attention. And then you have stories like him meeting a mechanic who turns out to be, or hinted to be, Jesus. It's an incredible playground to play with, and a lot of writers have done so many good things with just that premise, and with the legacies of that premise in itself. I was never the best Marvel reader, and Ghost Rider is definitely not a comic that I felt myself really engaged with deeply, but I still really enjoyed it, and I still really find it fascinating to this day when you see stuff like Caveman Ghost Rider or Robbie Reyes and all that kind of stuff. It's instantly iconic. But then again, he also did Sergeant Fury, and who doesn't love that era of Nick Fury, that original soldier encapsulation, because you just see Howling Commandos, you see just all this stuff. And honestly, I prefer this kind of to what he later became, that super spy stuff. I feel like that's on a different level, and these works are just so fantastic, and I feel like I'm doing a disservice just by gushing about them and not really going into it, because they had these amazing careers. Of all, honestly, in terms of the Marvel side, Marie Severin, who did artwork that is probably the first thing that I turn to when I think of Marvel art, because like I said, I got into this stuff through Hulk Essentials. I read Marvel mostly through Essentials, and Marie Severin was definitely all over the map on those. She made her mark without a doubt on any of the iconic Marvel franchises and characters and teams. Her art was the perfect blend of something that was very Silver Age, something very freewheeling, but also the deep nuance and emotional investment of, say, the Bronze Age and afterward. Her art for Marvel covers like from Hulk and Submariner, they stand the test of time. And they stand as pillars of what Marvel art can be, what Marvel art should impart on the readers in terms of mindfulness and hearty, more depthy feelings that you can really expect from these stories. You have anecdotes like how Jack Kirby would go to her for covers because he knew that she could do a better job at creating the tonal impact than he could. And if it wasn't true, then I would have to believe it anyway, because it just makes so much darn sense. All three of these great comic legends are gone, and it's a incredible shame, but it is really heartening to see people really coming out of the woodwork and showing their support and their respect for these works. I see so many comic artists that I respect and that I really enjoy today just going out on social media, doing interviews, saying about how much of an impact and how much these creators themselves meant to them personally as things to aspire to. Raise one up to them. They defined as much as anyone else did, the big two, for a generation, hopefully generations to come. And with that, let's get into the more general news. Starting off with movie news, there's been a lot of interesting developments. One of the first things that pops to mind is that Greg Nicotero is on the Spawn movie, and he is redesigning Spawn. And if you don't know who Greg Nicotero is, he is probably one of the most interesting designers of, say, the mid to late 90s in genre movies for Hollywood studios. And he was also one of the hosts for Sci-Fi's Face Off, one of the three original hosts, although I always loved Patrick Tatopoulos a lot better in both the show and in art. Anyway, that's a great get for me. I think that it does show a lot of where this movie might be going, because I think Greg Nicotero also worked on the original movie, and Spawn's design in that was also really, really fun and honestly a great translation of what was in the comic. I know that this is going to be a Blumhouse movie, and the budgets for Blumhouse's productions are intentionally restricted and confined, so I wonder how that'll play into how he's going to be able to design and how it's gonna work, because I know that in the Spawn movie, the original one, the technology wasn't there for a lot of the digital elements, so it comes off looking completely shit. This, however, with the benefit of time and hopefully some smart filmmaking, we'll see something really, really cool. Although, like I've always said whenever we hit more Spawn news, where the hell is Twitch? One of these days, one of the news that comes in is going to be about Twitch's casting, and I'll be over the moon about that, unless it's someone horrible. Anyway, we also have a lot of really fun Marvel news. First being that Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3 has been delayed indefinitely. It seems like Disney didn't blink. Again, I thought this was over. I thought this was over the last time we recorded and said, okay, now we can also all just move on with our lives. And it seems Disney said, great idea, to that general feeling and atmosphere that was in the air from all the protests and rehire James Gunn petitions that even Dave Bautista was going after. I think after I recorded, like the day after, Bautista posted online a lot of disparaging and inflammatory accusations at Disney for being supporters of the alt-right and stuff like that, which probably did them no favors. Although, like I've said, Volume 3 being delayed, this is the stance they took, and it doesn't seem like any of the cast members saying, oh, the shame, or sort of reaching around their backs and taking their tails with them to Disney Corp. So, you know, it's just another thing, and it's a shame for fans who really want to see Volume 3, but I think Volume 2 ended on a good note. We'll never see Adam Warlock, but it's fine. It works in the general end. Whatever happens, it's probably the area of least resistance. Hopefully, we'll hear some news about what's going to be on the slate next. In probably more interesting news, we have Wesley Snipes trying to make a comeback in both Hollywood and with audiences by trying to get Blade sequels going. He's apparently pitched 2 ideas for Blade sequels to Marvel, and honestly, I don't think that any of them would be better than just taking that Blade's daughter pitch that Marvel Comics tried to float around like the last 4 years. It has never gone off the ground. I can't remember who exactly were the creators on that, but there was this pitch for a comic about Blade's daughter coming into her own as a vampire killer. And I think that would be a good thing to just fold into a sequel. A soft reboot using a great dynamic. I think that Snipes would be really fun to see as like this dad mentor figure, and trying to travail the pitfalls of also raising someone who's also a vampire killer. Although someone did point out to me that Snipes would never go for it, and I think we all know by now how much of a diva Wesley Snipes was on the Blade movie, so I guess that's ruling that out. I wouldn't mind seeing Snipes back for a Blade movie series, but I also wouldn't mind just it rebooting or not happening again. It's definitely something that it depends on whoever comes out with what, and with what director and writing team, and just the general enthusiasm for it. So we'll see what happens. Speaking of things from the 90s that are trying to break back into comic book movies, we have the news that Venom is getting its own theme song performed by Eminem. And he released a small tease snippet of it the other day. And honestly, it's sounding like it could be a lot of fun. And that just screams out to me as so emblematic of an earlier era. It was the same thing when the first of the Babe-produced Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles movies came out, and that had its own theme song that was a rap song. It definitely sets from the outset a superficial sense of the tone and the atmosphere this movie is going to be indulging in, where you can be like, oh, so this is going to be a fun romp. It has its own theme song. Like, you can think of the Will Smith movies like Wild Wild West and Men in Black. It's an easy way to signal that this movie is going to be something that you shouldn't take too seriously. Sometimes that's a falsehood, while this movie itself is just incredibly bad. Who knows? But it's a nice sign nonetheless, and hopefully when the song drops, it isn't complete crap. But still, it's really fun to think about. And lastly, for the movie news, we have really strange week for DC, where you have news that Alec Baldwin is going to be on the Joker movie playing Thomas Wayne, and then literally the next day they have reports saying that it was either a wrong report or that he stepped out. I don't think there's been confirmation one way or the other that he was either playing it or not playing it. I know that some of the reports are saying that it was backing out, say that because of scheduling conflicts, which I guess would be fun and fine. Alec Baldwin has been quoted as saying that 25 people could be playing this part. It's not essential for him. And considering that it's meant to be a Joker movie, I can totally think that's probably the truth, or at least closer to the truth than, say, something like he backed out because he realized these movies are crap, like some people are saying. It's still just a funny little runaround for no reason, because it just happens one year after the other. In my mind, it's like the first report happened because someone overheard a meeting, and then the next report happened because they didn't hear the end of it, where he declined. So what a fun level of shitposting emerged from all that crap. We also have more news on the development of the Black Adam and Flash movies, where we have them stating that Black Adam movie is currently in script development and it's definitely going to happen because they want to do a Batman vs Superman type thing with the second Shazam movie, where you have a Shazam movie, a Black Adam movie, and then they meet and fight in their own sort of crossover movie, which I think is a lot of work for something that could have just been one movie or a proper sequel. It's Black Adam doesn't really have that much content for a movie unless he's already set up. You can do a Black Adam movie after he's set up, but before he's set up, as the setup, it just doesn't work because Black Adam needs to start off evil, or at least evil enough that he doesn't hold the movie on itself. You can't have that aspect where he's like a noble warrior, a noble sort of tyrant. That great setup, and I don't want to disparage that setup, but he needs to start from a place first. You just can't go off from that to begin with. Then the conflict that he has with Shazam, Captain Marvel, Billy, and all that, it comes off feeling very weightless. There's no real impact and stakes to it because you know that Black Adam isn't really a bad guy. And in part of the interview is announcing this, some producers on it saying that they're not going to tone down Black Adam. He's going to be a real evil guy, despite the fact that this is a whole movie dedicated to him, with The Rock still playing him. And I'm saying that's probably not going to happen. The Rock has made a point of not doing movies that take it to that level. Even Rampage was supposed to have a darker, a little bit more of a sadder ending, and he went and vetoed that. He had the power to veto that, and they changed the ending for him, make it more upbeat and a little more lively. So yeah, I don't trust that for 1 second that Black Adam is either going to happen or if it's going to happen the way that they're saying it's going to happen. And that honestly makes me very distrustful of the potential for a Shazam sequel. The Flash, as always, they say they're moving forward. They're probably going to start shooting in 2019 at the very least, according to the Iris West actress. I don't believe it for 1 second. The Flash movie is never happening. End of story. We also have some great new developments on the DC Universe streaming app. We have an actual release date. It's going to be September 15th. With the first season of Titans coming out weekly starting October 12th. So if you do the first month, you're kind of stuck if you want to check out Titans, which is a bit of a shame because Titans should be crap, then what's the point? But anyway, I'll definitely be thinking about doing a trial at least at first, or at least getting the first month. So we'll see when that pops up in about 2 weeks. We also have some more news on the Swamp Thing series. They're going to be adapting an Alan Moore story, one of his best on his run, and I know that I've said before that I don't prefer Alan Moore's run, although the stories in it are actually still really, really good, and I admit that. And we also have plot details from the pilot. It seems that Abigail Kane will be taking the lead as the focus of the show and giving it kind of a procedural edge. She's been described as a CDC agent who comes back to Huma, where the show is set, as sort of a prodigal daughter type situation, and things just kind of unravel from there. Can't wait. I honestly can't wait, and it seems like it's at least going to be a unique fixture in the streaming site. Fingers crossed. Alright, and I think that says it all for almost all the news, except for one thing that I want to get into. It seems that Comicsgate, if you haven't heard of it, has kind of exploded onto the mainstream after being around for a couple of years now. Of some instances going back even a few years before that, sort of the prototype Comicsgate, after they led a campaign against Darwin Cook's widow, Marcia Cook. And that in itself has gotten some feedback about how it's been around for a long time, and it only really got mainstream attention after they attacked the widow of a creator who was very respected, rather than taking it apart earlier on when it attacked lower run creators, which it has. It's definitely made a large splash, and with a lot more press coverage and reaction from it from companies and from artists and writers all around. And I have to say, I just want to put my foot down on this forthright in saying that Comicsgate is just one of the most ridiculous and honestly insane, chaotic, and just maddening things to think about. I mean, when you hear how Ethan Van Sciver uploaded an hour-long video of him decapitating and mutilating Rose Tico action figures, you have to wonder if your hold on reality is breaking down. And I don't want to misspeak about anything or misword anything, because when you go from that, there are a lot of things that need unpacking, and one false move and who knows what people might take from it. I just want to say outright that Comicsgate is for jerks. It's the most ridiculous thing. It really is. And for many reasons. And I'll break some things down that I want to get out. First things first, they say it's for comics criticism, but they don't really critique anything. It's not something like, oh hey, this comic needs critiquing for this reason because this point of it wasn't done well in these ways, or could have been done better in these ways, or something like that. No, it's like this comic was bad because this type of person wrote it. They wrote it for this type of audience. They wrote it in this style for this generation, for that generation, or whatsoever. And that's not criticism. That's just blindly washing across entire generalizations. America, the Marvel comic, isn't bad because Gabby Rivera is a Latinx. It isn't bad because of her sexuality. It isn't bad because of her race. It isn't bad because of America, the character's race. It isn't bad because it's written for a young generation. It isn't bad because it's slice of life. It isn't bad for any of these fucking things. It's bad for a bunch of reasons, and that's actual critique. That's actual analysis. Not saying, hey, just because Gabby Rivera is Latinx means that Latinxes shouldn't be fucking writing. And not saying because Gabby Rivera is this sexual orientation doesn't mean that, hey, anyone who writes in this sexual orientation is a bad writer. It's just so fucking stupid. And that's not comics criticism. You're not actually critiquing anything. You're like, but it's about comics criticism, about integrity in comic criticism. Integrity in comics criticism is actually talking about the comic, not the people behind the comic, not the actual sort of insane little maddening defenses you make for why you think the comic is bad just on a personal level. It's not about the personal level of it. Of course, there can be a personal contingent in your analysis if you're talking about something that actually has something to do with you or something that you are familiar with. Like with America, I can talk about how unresearched it is and how false it rings out about the actual Latino experience or what we want to see as representation. See, that's actual fucking critique. It's not saying like, oh, yeah, Rivera and everything that has to do with that is bad in general. I don't want to see that in comics. Something like that, because it's ridiculous. It's all about execution. It's really setting me off because then they go on the flip side saying, okay, what about that? What about them? They say the same thing about us. They're all elitist and gatekeeping from us and from our taste from getting any real traction in Big Two. That's just completely false when you think about how Ethan Van Sciver had years and decades long career with DC, and how even Chuck Dixon, who is writing All Hero, which we'll get to in a second, just had only recently a 12-issue Bane maxi series out of nowhere that no one was thinking about, that even Kurt Busiek defended by saying, hey, Chuck Dixon is a creator, he's a top tier creator, I'm reading Bane Conquest. Where's the gatekeeping? You're creating your own pitfalls by acting in such an insane and misogynistic and bigoted manner. You're acting like lunatics, and you wonder why no one's taking you seriously. And talking about Chuck Dixon, we have All Hero, and people who take All Hero and series like that as a vanguard for breaking down the system by using the all-new utilization of crowdfunding, which is just insanity because that's been around for a while. People have been using crowdfunding and Patreon and all sorts of things to get their comics off the ground. You haven't discovered shit. You haven't discovered even independent publishing as of yet. And the people who did, and the people who have been using that for in the modern generation for years now, they're the kind of people who have been doing comics that you would scoff at, that they would totally try to cast out. And I find that hilarious, especially when they're saying, hey, we're doing things the right way, and they somehow get conned. And I'm saying that straight. They're straight out being conned. These people who buy into this bullshit, into paying $40 for a trade paperback of like 5 to 6 issues, and $80 for a small thin hardcover of the same 5 to 6 issues. Yeah, that makes sense. A trade paperback of 6 issues should at most cost $21 plus tax. A hardcover should cost just $40. But for some reason, they believe in sight unseen so much that they just buy into the stuff in order to make a stance. No, if I don't like a comic, I'm not gonna go around just buying the opposite of that comic just for no reason. I'm gonna find something that I actually like, that actually exists, that I can tell whether or not is good or not, rather than letting my politics get to my head and letting me run wild buying anything just for the sake of it. That's ridiculous. It's maddening. $80 for a fucking hardcover, and the preview, the masterful preview for this hardcover for Alt Hero Q, which is based on QAnon, which is blowing my mind right now, is just a guy in black shirt and pants jumping walls holding a gun. Yeah, that's worth $80. And they're shaking comics, they're bringing comics, this whole new sense of comics to the world again and making them profitable again. And yet the only things they can think of is either Wildcats ripoff, Youngblood ripoff, Suicide Squad ripoff, and things like Cyberfrog, literal 90s throwbacks that no one gave a shit about back then, coming back. That's not bringing any new sense of style or talent to it. It's just retreading, and not even retreading the stuff that even had an impact. Because when you think about the stuff that is still around from the 90s, they're still around for a reason, because they were like the only good things. No one was clamoring for fucking Cyberfrog for the last 30 years. No one. And yet you have Deathblow. People love Deathblow. Deathblow is memorable. Wildcats, memorable. Even Spawn, still fucking memorable. They're iconic. They're iconic for a reason, because they capture a sense of style and mood. You're doing is just retreading that sense of style and mood, but at a higher cost with less talent. It's just a scam. It's really just a scam. And they can say, hey, but this isn't being catered to on the Big Two at all. Then stop thinking about the Big Two. Big Two is the only thing. And you know the thing about stuff like America and Young Avengers? They came and went. They came and they went. I didn't like America, but it's gone. And now I love Immortal Hulk. And I am really interested in Venom. And there are things like the Moon Knight run with Jason Burrows that I still really enjoy. Maybe you should just think a little bit. At the end of the day, comics is just a medium, and you can think about all this other stuff. There are comics right now coming out that are very action focused, that are very classically told focused. But it's all about making a statement with your wallet. At the end of the day, it's not about the quality of the comic. It's only about trying to shape the system in ways the system already has moved on from. The system has already moved on and incorporated Indiegogo, Kickstarter, Patreon, all these places that you're saying are going to be the new tent poles for whatever you're trying to do. And then you go online saying all this ridiculous bullshit about characters and comics and stuff like that. And it's maddening because, hey, you don't like it? Then just do it. Just make something good. But you're not making something good. You're making something that's a response. All the things that you're doing are responses. When you're not actually coming from a creative or actually hearty and investment-filled place. And the only ones that are actually benefiting from this are the ones that want to ride the coast of these people looking for something. I could come out of a Kickstarter right now saying, we're going to bring something back to the original days of comics. All right? And I can say that it's going to be something that doesn't pander, that isn't for snowflakes, any guy kind of stuff. I can make a fucking Kickstarter out of nothing. And I probably would get a quite sizable chunk of money. I could go on Indiegogo, go for flexible goal, and I could find some money out of this shit. Because that's all it is. Be actually creative. You're going to say you're going to analyze something, analyze something. You're going to say that you actually want to create comics that come from the fucking heart. Not just propelling the careers, in quotes, of those that are just scamming the fuck out of you for $80 hardcovers. Because you come off looking like morons, and at the end of the day, when you go online receiving all this hatred, that's what you are. That's what you are. Anyway, let's move on into what I read this week, because this, despite everything else that happened, was a really good week. First, let's start off with Web of Venom, Vietnam, which is spelled VENAM. It's a pun because it's set during Vietnam. I have no idea what Web of Venom is, but I'm guessing it has something to do with some sort of status quo shakeup. I have no idea. But it does tie into the regular Venom ongoing, and it tells the backstory to one of the characters who had a twist going on in the previous issue, which I mentioned there was like a slight cliche that I'm really in love with. And this delves more into that, and it's that the Venom symbiote for this side character actually sort of replaced him. That guy is dead, and it just took his form, and it's now living among society as a free-thinking and free-willing sentient being. So this issue really tells the story of his host's death in Vietnam, and it's really, really well done. It has some cameos from Nick Fury and Wolverine, but overall it does tell a really concise tale that fits neatly in the reading order and publishing order alongside the actual Venom book. In trade, this could slot in right between the last issue and the next issue with ease. There's a nice fluidity to that. Hats off to that. It's a great issue. It's really fun if you're interested in this series. And while this series doesn't seem to be doing a lot of extraordinarily complex and original things, it's still doing the beats that it's doing with a lot of finesse. Second would be Red Hood and the Outlaws Annual number 2, starring Arsenal. And this is the issue that directly follows the previous one, and it sets off the new status quo with Red Hood being alone and Bizarro and Artemis being lost in space and time. Now, this is an issue that is more of a transition issue, but it also does some really funny things that I want to talk about. First being that we all know by now that Roy Harper, Arsenal, is going to be in Heroes in Crisis, that Tom King murder mystery series that looks like complete shit. And this issue is nothing but death flags for him. It's meant to lull the reader into a false sense of security about this character, but it does it in such a blunt and point-blank way where it becomes kind of funny how Roy Harper is getting his life back on track and he's sorting things out. And the first stop on his journey is going to be checking out Batman, Wonder Woman, and Superman's secret therapy rooms in Sanctuary. Oh no, I wonder what would happen. It's worse than Dead Meat's death in Hot Shots. It's ridiculously callable. Still, it's a great issue because Scott Abdel does great dynamic stuff with Jason and Roy and their friendship, and there's lots of little funny moments like when Jason's life is saved by Roy's propeller arrow. And that's something that's just so charming and endearing and funny. It's great. Plus, we also do get more advancement on Artemis and Bizarro and where they're at. And according to an interview that came out right after this issue came out with Scott Abdel, it's that the Jason arc is going to be a solo arc, but it's only temporary. He hasn't said how long it's going to be, but he confirms that we're going to be following Artemis Bizarro in backups and as a subplot for the time being. So they're not gone from the book, and that's great news. And it honestly makes me a lot more at ease with regards to where the series is heading, because it was such a perfect trio dynamic, and it would be a shame to have lost that. And he admits in an interview that there was some editorial kerfuffling that he had to kowtow to in order to get Jason being solo for a while. So whatever, it's fine. And I can't wait for this arc to see what happens, because maybe Abdel will navigate through Jason being wannabe edgy and having a horrible new outfit well enough, and we'll see more and more Bizarro and Artemis as we go along, because they are stuck in a quite predicament. They are, for now, trapped in what seems to be Earth 3, or at least the closest equivalent to it in the Dark Multiverse. So that's fun. That's fantastic. And lastly, but not leastly, I'm going to lump these all together, even though they're each well written enough, is the newest wave of Looney Tunes and DC crossovers. That includes Catwoman and Sylvester and Tweety, Lex Luthor and Porky Pig, and Daffy Duck and Joker. I didn't read Harley Quinn and Gossamer, but I hear that's alright as well. But each of these was almost pitch perfect. It's such a great wave that they honestly single-handedly saved this week for me, because I know everyone goes down and puts down Fifth Weeks as like being the ones where comic companies shill out undesirable titles, but no, each of these three were just played to the greatest extent. You have Catwoman, Sylvester and Tweety, and the entire concept of that is all of the animal-themed heroes and villains and everyone in the DC universe, specifically cats and birds, go to war to save themselves. And it's done in such a way where it's a laugh a minute. It's both engrossing but also full of lots of subtle and just very ingenious gags. Then you go to Lex Luthor and Porky Pig, which is a heavy allegory. There's some humor in it, but it's definitely a very dense fable about politics and society and the individual's responsibility within it. So Mark Russell definitely plays a really dark and imposing hand in this one. And it's such a gripping read. It's gripping. Daffy Duck and Joker by Scott Lobdell. Again, it's not as great as the other two, but it was still pretty chuckle-worthy. I think he got Daffy Duck's personality and voice just right. Kudos to all of these, honestly. Alongside A Walk Through Hell, number 4, still steady. I've tempered on it so much because it seems to be waffling about a little bit, but I still really enjoy it. So I hope that it lands the next plot beat fairly well enough, because if it does, then definitely going on my checklist of things to read. Can't wait till next week's releases, because there's some really good ones in there that I can't wait to rip into. Anyway, let's move on into listener questions. We have one this week from the ever awesome Medea, and their question is, what makes a good horror comic? Now this has to be one of the hardest questions I've ever gotten, because there is a plethora of answers I could give, and any of them could be rebutted in dozens of ways. But to just take one out of the air, here we go. A good horror comic, above all else, should know when to give information and when to withhold it. I know a lot of people say that about horror movies, about how the horror is only scary if you don't know much about it. And I call bullshit about that. I think in horror movies, the horror is only as effective as to when and how you relay information. When people say stuff like that, they usually say it more in terms of Halloween. Because like, hey, Michael was a kid, so a serial killer could be anyone. That's the really scary part. But Michael's only a kid for like 2 minutes of the movie, and we only see him as an actual kid for a couple of seconds. So it doesn't really sink in. There's no weight or gravity to that. And I love Halloween, but that's one of the arguments for it, and for the use of just completely having the characters be in the dark, that I don't agree with at all. I think the characters can only be in the dark as much as it makes sense for the horror to be effective. The horrific element of, like, say, a monster or supernatural force, they can be explained 100%, and they can still be more effective than if you didn't explain it at all. In a comic, it's a visual medium, so you don't want to draw everything. There should be something left to the imagination, because if you're just drawing everything, nothing works on the same visceral level, unless you're drawing like Guro or something really, really disgusting and fucked up. But that's a whole different thing than actually being scary, isn't it? Then you have to really lessen the blow of the art in that sense. You have to really go for something that is going to have the same impact, but not give away the game, because a person can get accustomed to what they're seeing if it's just on a two-dimensional plane of existence and obviously drawn and not like a photo or something. But the implications of something in both the writing and in what we can see in terms of what we are limited to seeing on the page, that makes the impact. One of the best at this, I think, in just recent memory of things I read and I reread, has to be Junji Ito, because while he does go for the visual in terms of visuals, there are some things that he leaves indistinct. And I know this is going to be one that people might disagree with me on, but you have the Amigara Fault story he did. And the very last, the impact page, what you get is a very washed out and very dark and almost indistinct blurry image of this, let's call it the horror punchline, that caps off the story. It does exactly how much it needs to. It would have not been as effective and as memorable if it had 100% clarity and detail. There's just enough there to make you start wondering, to really get into it. And there's just enough information about it. It's not just holes. You get that whole prophetic dreams that do explain a large chunk of it. So it's not something that's a mystery for the sake of being mysterious and the mystery itself being scary inherently. No, it's nothing like that. I think that what makes a good horror comic is how much the author is able to execute and balance out those two opposing forces. what we will do and how much they have to do, and not just leaving everything blank, because I always felt that was a cheap out. The thing didn't get any less scary from knowing what it was. Alien doesn't get any less scary by thinking that a space jockey is a tall albino man, because we don't think about the space jockey, or at least because the space jockey doesn't really have anything to do with it. The alien itself is scary. The fact that it came from our alien is just happenstance. Once you accept that the alien exists, of course other aliens exist. He was never part of the horror. So what makes a good horror comic is that visually and with the writing, they each have to do the correct amount. And whatever correct amount that is, it depends on the premise, on the themes, and the ideas presented. And this is a great question, and I could go on and on about this, but that's what makes a great horror comic to me, depending on the access you're playing to, which can vary, and the content that you're trying to develop, which also may vary. So I think that's something that is probably a universal thing. Anyway, thanks again, Medea, and I would like to thank you all for continuing on to join me as we head on into the second season of Unsourced Wall, which I will call the autumn season. Let's make it a good one. As always, if anyone out there has their own questions, topics, or comments they want to hear discussed on the show, please comment below. You can tweet at me on Twitter at my handle at THE_SNICKMAN. Also, as well as I want to give out a shout out to the artist who did cover art, Eternally Grateful at DOTEMCEE. It's been a pleasure recording this, and I can't wait to see y'all next week.